Hello and welcome to Filling the Sink, a podcast from Catalan News. My name is Beth Cohen and today we'll be talking about depression. According to the World Health Organization, depression is a leading cause of ill health and disability worldwide, affecting between 4 to 5% of the global population. And yet the stigma surrounding this invisible illness often leads patients to suffer in silence, without adequate support from family, friends, and healthcare professionals. This week on Filling the Sink, we'll be discussing what depression is, what the major causes and treatments are, as well as meeting patients who are battling with depression and consulting experts on the topic. Joining me in the studio to tackle this tricky topic is Lea Beliaeva. Hello, Lea.
Hi, Beth. Nice to be back.
Nice to have you. So, Lea, depression is a word which is used often vaguely and sometimes flippantly to describe a transient feeling of sadness. Perhaps we should start with a definition of what depression actually is and how it differs from a logical feeling of sadness as a response to external life events.
Yeah, so depression is a serious and common mental health disorder, and basically it's this persistent and debilitating feeling of sadness, of feeling down, numb, or feeling hopelessness, or even feeling worthless. And with persistent, that means that it lasts for 2 weeks or more. There are also different types of depression. So from mild cases, that is luckily the most common one, to moderate and severe ones.
And what are the symptoms?
So aside from this persistent feeling of sadness and hopelessness, other common symptoms can be losing interest or pleasure in activities that you once enjoyed. It can be changes in appetite or feeling really, really tired, feeling guilty or feeling worthless. People, they may also withdraw socially. And then in more severe cases, depression, it can lead to thoughts of death, suicidal thoughts, or suicide attempts. In other cases, depression can also lead to self-medication or some level of abuse of alcohol or drugs.
Be they legal or illegal.
Exactly.
Obviously, these are some of the symptoms, and people suffering from depression can feel all of them, or just some of them, or even other symptoms that we haven't mentioned.
Yes. And I think it's also really important to stress that you can have depression without being depressed 24/7. I mean, you can have peaks of joy. You can go out and enjoy your day with your friends and then go home and start feeling depressed again.
The negative thoughts can come creeping back in. So it's just not a constant state of sadness.
It doesn't have to be.
It has ups and downs. And are there risk factors that can increase a person's probability of suffering from depression?
Yeah, depression can affect really anyone, but there are some factors that can play a role. It can be, for example, biochemical factors, so changes in hormone levels. It can be genetic, so it can run in the family. It can have something to do with your personality. If you have low self-esteem, or you are easily overwhelmed by stress, or if you even had depression previously, you can get it again.
And I'm guessing also if you've had traumatic life experiences, this can affect your psychological profile.
Yeah, that's a really important factor to take into consideration. These environmental factors like gender inequality or continuous exposure to violence, neglect, or any kind of abuse or poverty, anything that can stress you out can cause depression.
So a kind of ongoing exposure to something that weighs you down.
Exactly.
Emotionally. And who are the major risk groups?
It can really occur at any time and at any age, but on average, it can first appear during one's late teens to mid-20s. And then women are 2 to 3 times more likely to be diagnosed with depression, meaning that in theory, at least, women are at higher risk of depression. But what that actually means, we will get back to later on in the podcast.
And what about here in Catalonia? What are the figures?
So in Catalonia, more than 700,000 people have a depression diagnosis. And in Catalonia as a whole, we're 8 million people. So that means that almost 10% of the population over the age of 15 have some sort of moderate or severe depressive disorder. And of those, 2/3 are women.
They're huge figures.
They are.
And does age play a role?
Well, women younger than 29 and women older than 55 are the two groups primarily affected by depression. And the main reason for that is, well, in those age groups, people tend to go through different hormonal changes.
So it's a biological reason. But I think it's also important to stress that it can really happen to anyone and at any time of their life. Lea, you spoke with some people suffering with depression. Let's hear their stories.
Depression can be caused by a multitude of things, and according to the World Health Organization, people who go through adverse life events are more likely to develop depression. Clara, an English teacher now in her 60s, was struggling with mental health as a child, but it wasn't until she was kidnapped and sexually assaulted when she was 20 that she decided to seek help.
It was such a big shock to my life that I had to ask for help. So when I went to ask for help for that particular event, everything else showed up. For
Mara, who was born in Palestine but grew up in Norway, her mental health struggles began in her teens as she felt left out and in between cultures.
It started when I was in high school in Norway, where I started to realize the cultural differences between, for example, my culture and the other Norwegians or Europeans, that they were allowed to do things that I wasn't allowed to do or was like kind of taboo in my culture to do. And I started to differentiate a lot, so I started to feel left out a lot.
Mara struggled to put into words that she was going through depression because she, in her own words, didn't know what mental health was. Emma, on the other hand, says that she's well educated on mental health issues, having supported friends and partners through hard times. Yet it took her a long time to realize that she was in fact dealing with depression.
And I didn't really realize what it was. I just felt really bad. And I thought, well, this is circumstances. I lost my job. A lot of situations, kind of those core pillars in my life all changed at the same time. So there's a lot of destabilization. It's like, oh, I'm just going through a shit time. And then when I've really reflected back on that with my friends, with a therapist, I've realized that no, actually I felt quite bad for a while, probably about a year. And it's only now been going through a really difficult time in my personal life. It's only kind of through that I've been able to step back and be like, oh, sweetie, you're depressed. Yeah, there's a word for that.
Unfortunately, it's very common for people not to realize that they're depressed or need help. While some don't think they're sick enough to seek help, others believe mental health problems happen to other people and not to them.
And it's like, it's looked away from, it's in a way of like, it's embarrassing, or we don't talk about it. Okay, it happens to people, but we don't talk about it. These people are kind of crazy,
For Matthias, discovering he suffered from seasonal depression took almost 30 years, and before he sought help, he had reached a point of being suicidal. He attributes taking this long in part to stigma surrounding gender roles.
Especially for me when I was in my teenage years, this social pressure that you're a man, you shouldn't have feelings, or at least not the bad feelings. You should strive for, I don't know, getting a partner, partying and doing men's stuff. And I think that is something that has been a background noise constantly over my years until I got a proper diagnosis. And it was the realization, okay, maybe I was not the one that was wrong. It was maybe the people that I was surrounded by.
Since being in therapy and on medication, he has learned to be on the lookout for signs and to take them seriously.
I have come to an understanding that suffering is not a competition. As long as it affects your daily life, it should be enough to be taken care of and to make a cry for help. My relationship is detecting the early signs or the early triggers so that I can sort of take measures, preventive measures. The depression will come. I will have to go through it during winter, but at least I know when I should take a moment to take a breath, look around and start to prioritize what is more important for that moment.
For both Emma and Clara, therapy is not only helping them cope with their mental health struggles, identifying triggers and patterns, but it has also given them a new vocabulary.
And I thought, the sun has come out. There are words for everything. There is word like stigma. There is another word for self-stigma. There is another word for what people do to me, which is stigmatizing. And then she gave me a vocabulary. It was like she gave me like the dictionary.
Thank you to everyone who shared their story with us. I think having a vocabulary and knowing how to define and describe your illness is really helpful in terms of combating stigma.
Yes, and I think we really need to talk more about depression as a society as a whole. And it's definitely more common to talk about it now than it was just a decade ago. But I think there's still this prevalent idea of, well, I can't get it, or I'm not the type to get it. I have a great job. I have a great life. I'm not supposed to get it. And later on in the podcast, we will hear from Leigh Matthews, who was an Australian psychologist here in Barcelona, who gave a really great example of the way we should change our attitudes to depression.
Yes, you wouldn't say to a person with a broken leg that they should just get up and walk and stop being so lazy.
That's exactly right. So why are we talking to people who battle depression as if it's just laziness or they should really pull themselves together?
Yeah, or just shake it off.
Exactly.
And recently there's been an increase in cases of depression. Are we more depressed as a society, or is it just that we're better diagnosed?
So I asked this exact question to Dr. Gemma Parramon Puig. She is the president of the Catalan Society of Psychiatry and Mental Health, and she's also a psychiatrist at Barcelona's Vall hospital. And she said that it was a tough question to give a simple answer to. Just before, I mentioned that almost 10% of the population in Catalonia suffer from depression. And this number is actually up 28% since 2019.
And what can we attribute this increase to? Is it anything to do with the pandemic?
It is, but not in the way that we could expect it to. Dr. Parramon mentioned that there are three kind of interconnected factors that could explain the increase.
And what are they?
Basically, we have better access to medical help now than we did before. There are more online resources. We can easily get in touch with our doctors. We also have more access to information on what depression is, both as patients or people who suffer from depression and as healthcare professionals. So that means that we can seek help more, and the healthcare professionals can also treat us better. And then related to that, we have better access to psychological and psychiatric help, like medication that we didn't have before.
Okay, so to resume, there are more consultations, so depression is detected more, and therefore it can be treated better.
That's right. And Dr. Parramon, she also mentioned that although there's still a lot of stigma about mental illness and depression, it's slowly moving in the right direction compared to how the situation was just a decade ago.
Plus, she also goes some way towards explaining the gender bias in depression. Let's hear that interview.
When it comes to depression, most research shows that women are 2 to 3 times more likely than men to experience it, or at least be diagnosed with it. But according to Dr. Gemma Parramon Puig, understanding depression means looking at a combination of biological, social, and cultural factors.
Els motius poden ser molt diversos. Sempre que parlem de salut,
Dr. Parramon explains that social factors like gender inequality, struggling to take care of the family and working, or gender-based violence affect women more than men, and this can trigger depressive episodes. But severe hormonal fluctuations, whether during premenstrual cycles, pregnancy, postpartum, or perimenopause, can significantly increase the risk of mental health issues in women.
però després també hi ha molts factors psicosocials que influeixen, no? Sabem que les dones estaran sotmeses a més estrès.
And then there are the psychosocial factors like stress that can trigger depression. But although people of all genders have similar reactions to stress, women do experience more of it. And this means that they show up in the depression statistics in higher numbers.
Quin és el problema? Que les dones estan més sotmeses a estrès.
But that doesn't mean that men don't experience depression. In fact, when it comes to diagnosing men, Dr. Parramon says that there are several methodological errors or artifactual factors because some men can present symptoms that look very different from those we expect to find when we look for depression.
Però després hi ha una sèrie d'errors metodològics o el que podien dir factors artefactuals.
Instead of the typical symptoms such as sadness, loss of interest, or withdrawing from social life, Parramon says that there are many cases where men cope with depression turning to drugs or alcohol, staying out more, or even becoming aggressive. And that can lead to men being diagnosed with other things like alcohol abuse instead of depression, meaning that their cases don't show up in the depression statistics.
Però com es presenta la depressió en homes? No? Hi ha molts casos que es presenta amb consum d'alcohol.
But she emphasizes another important reason men are often undiagnosed. They are not used to or taught to express their emotions. in part because of societal ideals of masculinity that suggest that men shouldn't show feelings, which means that many don't seek help. And as a result, they go undiagnosed, their depression can worsen, which can lead to suicide. And this, according to Parramon, is one of the reasons why men are 2 to 3 times more likely to die by suicide than women.
Thank you, Lea, for bringing us that report. It's sad that men often feel unable to ask for help when they need it, and that for many that help comes too late.
Yeah, and for this podcast, I had talked to other psychologists, and they all shared kind of similar experience of having fewer male patients or clients. But the good news is that with the increase in online resources that I mentioned before and access to online consultations, men are actually starting to come forward and seek help more than they did before.
Mm-hmm. And talking about risk groups, would you say that the international community is particularly at risk?
Well, particularly at risk, I would say no, because everyone can suffer from depression, but it is true that the international community or immigrants in general face specific challenges that locals don't.
To find out more, we spoke with Australian psychologist Leigh Matthews, founder and director of the therapy clinic in Barcelona. Let's hear that interview.
Internationals are dealing with micro and macro losses, lots of grief. They are dealing with not only normal life stresses, but also the stress of living abroad, which means they are dislocated from normal support networks, strong support networks. And this is a really big risk factor. They're also isolated. There can be loneliness, the language barrier. There's also this kind of gulf between the expectations they may have had for their life abroad and the way that the life is abroad, with culture shock, large cultural differences that they're working through every day, the minor stresses, not having the normal familiar comforts.
Leigh says that not having your village when raising kids can be a struggle for people who move to a new country, and some of her clients wonder when and if they will ever feel at home.
I think that internationals have to become experts at living in ambiguity and what we call in therapy the dialectic, the and, which is I have a place that I love that was my home that still feels like home, and a new home, and I have to hold both of those things. I love my life here, and I'm also homesick at times, but it can be really challenging because the human brain likes certainty, it likes categories, it likes things to be very clear, and this life inherently as an international does not offer certainty, or it's ambiguous. Yeah.
But the question remains, what should you do if you think you're depressed?
So, I mean, the first thing is self-compassion, like actually acknowledge the depression, that I think maybe I might be depressed. The second step would be seeking help. And the first line of help is usually your doctor. And they will, help you if you need medication, but they might refer you to someone. The second step is to actually just take it easy on yourself. Know that everything feels hard. Even getting out of bed, getting dressed, getting out of the house is a really big step. Asking for help, telling the people in your life who you feel are non-judgmental and safe people that you're having a hard time, that your mood's really down, and that you think you might be struggling with depression, so that they can help you.
As a loved one, you can offer support, but as Leigh points out, it's important to take care of yourself and recharge your batteries first. And while your instinct may be to help, she also says that there are some things that are not always helpful to say to a person going through depression.
So definitely do not offer solutions and fixes like you just need to get out of the house, you just need to get up, you just need to think more positively, you just need to cheer up, you just look at what you have, how can you be so depressed? So all of these kind of comments are invalidating, and they only reinforce the very upsetting thoughts that someone who is living with depression is already having. So I'm a burden, I'm a failure.
So what should one do to help a loved one?
They just really need you to be there, and that sometimes can just be sitting with them in the same room and holding their hand. It can be checking in every day. So try to be consistent with your checking in. Hey, just to check in to see how you're doing today. You can send me an emoji if you want. I'm here, maybe doing some basic things like a little bit of housework or bringing them a meal, just letting them know that they're loved and they're not a burden.
Thank you to Lee, that's really excellent advice. Lea, do you have any more recommendations for where to seek help in Catalonia?
In Catalonia, I think the main place to reach out for help is CatSalut, the public healthcare provider, or just tell people around you as a first step.
And above all, just be aware that this is an illness and that it can be treated and that you're not alone. It's time now for our Catalan phrase of the week. Lea, what do we have?
This week we have veure la llum al final del túnel.
To see the light at the end of the tunnel. For any of our listeners who are struggling with depression or supporting someone who is, our thoughts are going out to you. We encourage you to seek support and we hope that you will veure la llum al final del túnel. This week on Filling the Sink, we've been talking about depression. Thank you to everyone who spoke with us. And of course, thank you to you, Lea Beliaeva, for joining me here in the studio.
Thanks to you, Beth.
That's all we have time for today. Thanks for listening. Make sure to subscribe to Filling the Sink wherever you get your podcasts if you haven't done so already. We'll be back again next Saturday with another exciting episode of Filling the Sink. On behalf of all the team here at Catalan News, I'm Beth Cohen, wishing you a great weekend. Fins aviat. Adeu.